Survey says the pulse of Michigan. Please welcome the editorial page editor of the Detroit News, Nolan Finley. Anchor of WDIV TV 4 NBC, Devin Skillion.
Well, thanks very much. I know it's 65 degrees and perfect, and they're starting to serve out on the porch. So
don't tell them that.
I shouldn't have said that.
Lock
I know.
the door.
So I'm delighted that you all have chosen to join us. We had did a joint poll over the past couple of weeks between the Detroit News and Channel 4, and we've been releasing it in bits and pieces while you all have been up here. You might not know that because it's been, of course, released largely back home. And but today we thought we'd go over the results of the findings. Some of them awfully interesting. Some of them maybe more predictable than others. But I think the way that Nolan and I would love to do this is we take you through this. We were really hoping that we could do this in sort of a town hall setting. So as you see something, please feel free to throw a hand up or make a comment as we go, and we will hopefully create our fodder for discussion from you and your reactions to what we're hearing. I'll show you the first portion of our poll. I always think it's best maybe to get the lay of the land, and this was the break. This is a statewide poll done by the Glenn Gariff Group out of Chicago, and this was of our statewide poll participants. You can see the breakdown works. Nolan, would you call this is fairly representative of the way we feel the state is generally, right?
Yeah, and it's been fairly consistent breakdown. What has changed over the years, that independent number keeps growing.
Yeah, exactly right. So you can see we're not quite in thirds, but fairly close to it, and I think that'll help us a little bit as we move forward. So one of the first questions that we asked was, is Michigan right now on the right track? And as you can see, just a slight lead for those who feel it is, 45% to 41% who say it's on the wrong track. This is mostly interesting when you consider, and I don't have the slide for it, but I think what makes this interesting is that when you look at, we also ask how people felt about the nation. Only 27% felt that the United States was on the right track. People felt a lot better about their home state. That's an interesting breakdown.
It is, and I think it reflects frustration that 6 years after the start of the Great Recession, we're still not back to where we think we should be. And you saw today, business leaders had a session with the governor touting all of the accomplishments and all of the progress we've made, trying to get the message out, but it's still been a tough sell to Michigan voters. I mean, you would have thought that number would be over 50%, that people were starting to feel better given the new jobs that are being created and given the economy is much more dynamic than it was of just a few years ago. But people aren't convinced. I mean, it's going to be a tough sell. We were down so far, so long.
Yep.
I really do believe it's going to be hard to get the buy-in.
Yep. We'll move to the next one. And this we ask, what is the biggest problem facing the entire state? And as you can see, it was not very close. 36%, by far the most often responded note was jobs, the economy, unemployment, and that plays into exactly what we're saying there. The closest that anything came other than other was, as you can see, transportation and roads, and we've got more on the roads coming up a little bit later. So we asked about the approval for Governor Snyder, and right now it's at 54%, and when you look at the breakdown of the voters, the people who participated in this poll, that's, I suppose, bodes pretty well in an election year, wouldn't you say?
Well, it looks like he's picking up most of the independents. I would expect a lot of that disapproval, or it pretty much matches the Democratic number. This is as high as that approval number has been in quite a while. I think it's as high as it's been since just shortly after election when he was still in his honeymoon stage. You're a governor going into a re-election, and your approval number is starting to hit its peak. You got to feel pretty good about that.
Joe, about where you would have thought it would be? No, okay. We'll move on then to where things.
What about your crosstabs? Does it show Republicans?
We do. I didn't want to get that much into a drill down, but it's largely as he's got very solid Republican support and winning the independents pretty strongly right now. We asked, has Governor Snyder been good for Detroit? This was a really interesting question when you looked at and when you broke it down. statewide, 37% believe he's been good for Detroit. I suppose if you wanted to, you could put the bads and the no effect together and say that that was actually a higher response. But when you looked at this, Nolan, in the southeast Michigan, the 3-4 county area, and even in the city of Detroit, it got surprisingly higher.
Yeah, it was in every region of the state. There seemed to be support for what the governor is doing in Detroit, and this was a political risk for him. When he, there's no votes for the governor in Detroit, and he has engaged more in Detroit than any other governor, Republican or Democrat, in my memory, and I think it's paying off for him a little bit.
One of the topics we'll be exploring on Flashpoint Sunday morning, something that I just tweeted earlier this afternoon under overheard on Mackinac, I heard somebody say, so let me get this straight. We're going to have an increase in the minimum wage, we're going to give money to Detroit, and we're probably going to have a tax increase to fix the roads, and Republicans are in charge. Interesting the way things turn. So then we ask, as we looked at the governor's race, and this was where things stand right now, 45% in favor of Governor Snyder, 35% in favor of Mark Schauer, 18% is a lot of people who haven't made up their mind yet, but if there's a problem here, I guess it's two different ways of looking at it. Number one, there's a lot of room that Mark Schauer, it's not an idea of Mark Schauer's that is keeping him back, but only, I believe it was 57%, only 57% of the people polled know who Mark Schauer is. And that's trouble in May.
That's bad news for Mark Schauer, but these aren't great numbers for the governor, even though that's a pretty good lead, a very significant lead. 52-42 would be a lot better number. There's some concern in the governor's camp
not over 50.
that they haven't pushed over 50 at this stage. And it's interesting to compare that 45% with the 54% approval rating. So a lot of people who approve of the governor haven't yet decided they're going to vote for him. So the governor has a lot of work, but that number for Schauer, that name recognition number, that is really dismal. And you don't have that far to go. It's going to take a lot of money to close that gap. To get that, he's going to have to spend a lot of money just on getting his name out there. Money that he might have spent otherwise tearing down Snyder. So he's really behind the eight ball here. I understand he had a fundraiser up here that wasn't exactly a barn burner. I don't know that he's been up at the Grand Hotel at all.
I haven't seen him. He's been down at the Chippewa.
Yeah, he's got a lot of work to do, but it's not necessarily great news for the governor.
There's been no, please.
Backtrack.
Absolutely.
You guys were saying, numbers and percentages for people who may, think Governor Snyder was doing well for the city of Detroit. Do you guys have Detroit-specific numbers on that?
I did not bring out the full breakout. In fact, actually, Ro, you probably don't have it in your backpack either, do you? Have you got? Yes. You can see we might be able to find that exact number. Do you remember what the Detroit number was?
Detroit number was a lot less, obviously, than the other regions of the state, but it was still pretty strong.
Okay.
I think it was still outpaced the bad for Detroit.
Okay,
number,
wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. And it was a tough decision for trying to figure out how much of this to break down and really get down into, because it's not just some light reading. Of course, I'll see if I can dig into that one in a few minutes. Now, there's been an awful lot said and written, as you may have noticed, about yesterday's, not a debate, but a joint appearance between the two candidates for U.S. Senate to succeed Carl Levin. This was obviously taken before any of that was said or written. And we've got right now Gary Peters at about a 5-point lead, though plus or minus 4% has it in the margin of error almost, Nolan. But I think there's been a sense that it could be a tough year for Democrats. This was a race that just a few weeks ago was deadlocked by the same pollster, so it's moved a little bit. What are your thoughts?
Well, it moved after a pretty good spending buy on behalf of Peters that attacked land on women issues very effective. Apparently from the polling, it moved about 3.5 points in 2 weeks. I don't know what her response is going to be to that or what the response of the outside groups who are supporting her. I mean, most of the spending so far by both of them has been by outside groups on their behalf. This is still a close race. It's going to draw a lot of attention nationwide. It's going to draw a lot of money. You've got to look back at the top of the ticket number with the governor and Schauer. If that number starts to stretch out to 12, 14, it's going to make it very hard for Democrats down the ticket, including Gary Peters. I still think this is a race that is going to be closely watched nationwide, and it's still toss-up.
And crazy expensive.
$50 million or more.
$50 million for Senate race. It's mind-boggling to me. We will move now into how important is it? I thought this was a really interesting number. I often hear from Detroit viewers who tell me that Lansing, the rest of the state, doesn't care about Detroit. They want us to fail. We ask, how important is it for Detroit to succeed or not? 92%, this is statewide, 92% want to see Detroit succeed. Only 7% say they really don't care about what goes on. Even in an era when there's a lot of talk about, look, Detroit has to succeed for Michigan to do well as its biggest city, on and on and on. This was a really eye-popping number to me.
This is a stunning number to me. I mean, and it really surprised me because we've both been around here a long time, and we know the history of the divide between city and outstate, city and suburbs, and the outright hostility we've seen, and oh, let Detroit go down, and that miserable place, and on and on. We've got those emails. This is a remarkable number, and I think it shows a great movement over the last 3 or 4 years. It's as if our adversity has united us here in the state. And I think this is very positive.
We also asked then, what was the biggest problem facing Detroit? And as you can see, by far, it was city leadership that has caused a lot of Detroit's problems. We saw that, in fact, I believe the question is also coming up about what was the biggest, as I let you look at the rest of that. Crime, maybe a little farther down than you might expect there with 13%. But we also asked, what was the biggest factor in Detroit's bankruptcy? And overwhelmingly, more than half chose failed city leadership as the problem.
And those numbers in terms of Detroit and the outstate and suburbs didn't change much, or at least the proportion didn't change much. Detroiters agreed that failed leadership was the problem. They were a little more concerned with crime than the folks who didn't live here and have to live with the crime. But you know, there is a sense that Detroit is the author of its own misery in terms of how it got to this place.
The one on the bottom, when you break down the numbers, there were more people in Detroit who answered
Right.
that the state owes the city money and that revenue sharing has been a bigger problem, but not near as much as you would have thought, and that's what helped lead to that only being 3%. The next question that we asked was, will Detroit's leaders succeed then in revitalizing Detroit? And this is interesting because I think we saw this reflected yesterday in Mike Duggan's appearance here. Yeah. There seems to be, if Detroit leadership was the problem that got us here, there seems to be a new confidence in where we are now.
I think this is all about Duggan, because if you look, they blame failed leadership. They're obviously, and yet they're confident in the current leadership. That's obviously about Duggan and the really good sales job he's done and the good first impression he's made, not just on Detroiters, but on suburbanites and Michigan voters as well. I think this is an affirmation of him.
We asked about Detroit's crime problem, and this is a perception question. Is the problem with Detroit, with crime in Detroit, getting better, getting worse, staying the same? 20% believe it's getting better. I would tend to group the next two closer together, and you got more than, well more than 50% saying that it's either getting worse or staying the same.
And in the city, they definitely thought it was getting worse.
Yes.
And I think you had 36 shootings over the weekend in the city of Detroit. The folks who are living
over the holiday weekend.
Over the holiday weekend. Folks who are living this still aren't feeling really good about the way the city is handling the crime problem, and there's still not a lot of confidence in their public safety.
We ask about selling Detroit's art, the DIA's art. A little more than half, 55%, this is again statewide, did not support selling any art. When you broke this out, though, it really was a tale of two states. When you start looking at the metro area, southeast Michigan, overwhelmingly do not sell our art. You get into the UP in the western part of the state, why wouldn't you sell the art to fix your problems?
Yeah, the further you get away from the Renoir, the less you appreciate it, you know. And,
it's impressionist. The further you get away, it's supposed to look better. Wait a minute.
Yeah, that's not the case here. And it does reflect a little bit of a challenge for the DIA, particularly since it's now getting its support from the region. And it might want to do a little more outreach in terms of bringing its collections to places that otherwise wouldn't get to see this art, and building some support on a statewide basis. Because remember, a whole lot of state money is going in to save that art collection.
Yep.
I would say, and with great confidence, if it weren't for the fact that the art was put in play, you would not have this grand bargain. You wouldn't
Well, in
have.
fact, we talked about this on Flashpoint last week. Maybe I was slow to get this, the delicious irony of this. For all of the pensioners who've complained that you care about the art more than you care about me, if it wasn't for the art, their pensions wouldn't be made nearly as whole as they're going to be.
Yeah.
They would be losing a lot more money if the art wasn't there.
And I think it'd be a smart strategy for the DAIA to start cultivating a statewide, following a statewide audience.
We moved to the next one, and this is interesting though, even with the confidence in Detroit's current leadership, and this is what's been debated in Lansing quite a bit. Once Detroit moves itself out of bankruptcy, how long does the state have to keep control of the car keys? Continue oversight, 72%. They're not really ready to turn control back over.
Yeah, trust but verify. The city, the city numbers, of course, in the city they were very much opposed to continuing oversight, although every other region wanted to see the state hands-on. I think it reflects what the fits and starts we've seen in Detroit over the years. We had great hopes every time we've had a new mayor, and sometimes, or quite often, those hopes have gone bust. And I think there's a wariness here. Nobody wants to say problem solved.
Yeah. It's in the DNA of Flashpoint to talk about race, and especially even here on Mackinac, which we did a number of times over the years. Race relations in Michigan over the past 10 years, have they gotten better, have they gotten worse, or have they stayed the same? Interesting, here again, I suppose the story might be that you might want to group the middle two, that you've got almost 60% telling us that it's either stayed the same or gotten worse. Only 30% believe that we're making progress.
And again, the wider the community you live in, the better you think race relations are in this state. Certainly the numbers really soar for the gotten worse when you get into the city of Detroit. It reflects the challenge we've had here in this country, or in this community, forever. There's a great divide on perceptions of race relations, and it's reflected in this poll. So
then we started to get into the question about roads and how we're willing to fix them. 37% are willing to support a small tax increase. However, if you get down to the bottom, 15% say they don't want to support a tax increase, and you would group that in with the 46% who say no increase, there's enough money being spent on the roads, we're just not using it efficiently or wisely. Governor Snyder would take issue with this. He will tell you that we're not spending enough on roads.
He does, and we're not spending enough on more roads, but he's got to recognize, as do the advocates for more road spending, that you've got to do more than just talk about the potholes and we want to fix them. Yes, everybody wants them to fix them, but I talked to Richard Suba, the pollster, on this, and I'd like to hear from the folks out here on this issue too. He held focus groups on this issue, and everybody in the room agrees the roads are miserable, they stink, we need more road repairs, a better job. But the support, as you see, for spending more money was low. And the comments he heard overwhelmingly were, okay, your truck weights are too high, they're pounding our roads, the standards for construction are too shoddy, you're letting these contractors get away with bad work, not holding them to the fire. There's a real sense that it's not revenue, it's how the money is used, and I think that's going to take a selling job. They've got to talk about these issues. They've got to tell people, okay, it's not the truck weights. If it's not the truck weights, if they've got studies that say it's not the truck weights, then they need to show that. If they've got standards and are holding contractors to them, they need to sell that. But right now, people think their money is being used poorly, and there's a reason. There's another reason for that. I mean, we always talk about, we've heard the argument that Michigan is the lowest per capita state in road spending, and that's true, but it's also the 10th lowest state in the amount of revenue that's put into roads by the state and not the users of the roads.
Right.
So every other state spends more of its general fund budget on roads,
roads.
most other states,
Right.
than we do. And so there's that sense that we're paying enough, at the pump, because our taxes are still high, our fees are high.
Right.
But not getting enough state support.
But I think I love the ethical question of it, the exploration of who should pay for this. Because there's a certain argument to be made that the users of the roads should be made to pay for it, the trucks, on and on and on. However, if you're sitting at your house and maybe you only ride a bicycle, maybe you don't put much wear and tear on the roads at all, but that truck delivers a couch to your house, the mail comes to your house, nice roads around your house increase the value of your house. I mean, I think there's a common good that you can argue. So what is fair? Where's the fairest place to draw the money?
I would like to add a small point to the argument. I've heard from a lot of conservatives, like very active in the Republican Party, like the ones that generally get their candidates elected and very much involved. They talk about Michigan having one of the higher gas taxes in the country. Not the highest, but definitely very close to that level. How does that sort of factor into this conversation or this polling data?
Well, Michigan is one of the few states that charges a sales tax in addition to the regular fuel tax. And that money doesn't go to roads. That money goes into education. And that's part of the perception issue here. Not all of the taxes we pay on gasoline goes in the roads. And I think there's some discussion in this current proposal in the Senate that would take at least 2 cents of that
Right.
and put it into roads. But then you have to find a way to replace it. But people notice that gas here costs as much as it does anywhere else. So when you tell them your fuel taxes aren't, high enough, it's a tough sell.
I thought the lottery was going to fix our schools.
It's a lot.
Well, first off, as a government affairs guy for a trucking company, I can assure you it's the shoddy roads. that are doing this. And I think
Explain that whole truck weights thing to us, seriously.
it has nothing to do with it. And as far as these
Yeah, but
polling
why
numbers,
doesn't
How does it have nothing to do with
Why
it?
doesn't it?
I'm just playing along.
Oh, okay.
But these numbers are pretty consistent with previous numbers on this. I mean, this is everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die.
Despite the tough,
And,
That's right.
despite the tough winter and the bad roads that resulted.
but in the crosstabs, was there any geographic dissimilarity between, or is this consistent throughout the whole
Consistent.
state?
Consistent.
I'd wondered what other folks, do you hear people complaining about the way road money is being spent? Kevin?
Every conversation, it seems like, I ever have about roads is, the sense is we're just throwing good money after bad.
That's what our respondents said.
Because we can't, people roll their eyes, I think, when they go by a construction site.
Yeah.
Because they think, okay, well, there goes more money down the drain because in 2 years, that road's gonna break up. I don't know how you change that perception.
Well,
I don't know how you can go on, how you
Well, Kevin,
convince people.
the state has made some choices over the years
But-
to fix more roads for the shorter term rather than fewer roads for the longer term. And that showed up in the same roads. It's seemingly, wasn't that just closed 5 years ago? Now it's closed again, we're repaving it again?
Another thing I think we see is when they raise the tax on roads $1, they just pull $1 from the general fund that they were using for the roads anyway. Because that's what happened with the lotto. They said they were going to spend that on education, and all they did is reduce the amount spent from the general fund, and it's net, no effect.
Yeah.
And I think there's a perception that that's what happens when they increase the road taxes. They just reduce the general fund, and we're net in the same spot.
Oh, in fact, I think this all represents a real cynicism with the way government works. There's no doubt about it.
And to a certain extent, people are right. We have not prioritized roads in the general fund. Now, the last couple of years, they've taken some of the extra money in the general fund surplus and put it in there. But if you look at the way other states fund the roads, the proportion paid by the state is larger than the proportion paid by the users of the roads. And in this state, it's opposite.
Matt?
If I remember correctly, the last big miserable freeway closure we had in Detroit was 10, 12 years ago when they closed I-75 between 375 and 94.
Yeah.
And supposedly they did part of that project up to quote-unquote German Autobahn standards, so it was supposed to last forever even though it cost more up front. And they did the rest of it with our usual standards where it starts falling apart after 4 or 5 years. I'm not sure they ever really told anyone how that worked or if it worked or, you know, and I think maybe it's a communication problem partially in that we don't explain this very well to people what our options are here, that we can spend more, but it'll last longer. Here's what we have to do.
And
Yeah, I think that's a
don't-
great point.
I don't know that it matters much on I-75 because you're only going 10 miles an hour. What, you know, you hit a
Yeah.
pothole. But I think that is a good point.
Yep.
I mean, talk to us about the standards. And there's a sense here that people ought to just look at the potholes and say, we need more money, and not much of a sense that we need to sell this
Right.
tax increase.
I don't understand. I keep wanting to call like CERTA or somebody like that. I want to see memory foam for roads. That's my idea for fixing it. But this falling into the line with this, we asked this question. I know it may not be a fair either or, but we ask, where should the money be spent? Would you rather have it spent on schools, K through 12, or on the roads? Now I know it's not as simple as you have to make a choice. It's not either or. But when given that choice, 60% would rather see it spent on K through 12 school, on education, rather than on roads. And that again tells us, I think, about the way that they think money is being spent on the roads.
Spent on roads, but it also, it's interesting to me because the schools have also not used their money well. And you wonder why, you know, that same sort of perception didn't
carry
come
over.
over. And I think it's because the schools have done a much better selling job. You put a microphone in front of an educator and it's always, we need more money. The universities, we need more money. And I think they've done a better job of selling than perhaps the road lobby has.
It's all about storytelling, isn't it? And then the last question that we asked was just kind of a little adventure. How do you feel about the legalization of marijuana, given what we've already had, the experience that we've had with medical marijuana, and then also watching sort of what feels like the ebb and flow of society, looking at the experience in Colorado, where they're, sounds like they're making tax money hand over fist right now, but it's not a strong sell in Michigan right now.
This is surprising to me because this is a state that passed medical marijuana by what, 58, 60%? I mean, it was a really big margin. And once you pass medical marijuana, I think there's something like 50, 75,000 of these marijuana cards out there for people who've got bad backs and anxiety.
But in fact, I wondered if this
everything
wasn't a
else.
reaction to the way that people feel like medical marijuana has gone, that felt to a lot of people
be.
like some sort of a sham almost.
It could be, but we all thought that was going to be the door opener, and it doesn't appear that it is. And there doesn't seem to be any great call here, as you've seen in Colorado, Washington, some other states, to legalize this. Now in Colorado, you know, they're making the case, as you said, that tax dollars has increased, but also that the illegal drug activity has decreased, the drug gangs and what have you. And it's that message not getting through here, clearly.
Well, and
what do you all think?
Yeah.
Legalize marijuana? not
Legalize
legalize?
marijuana. How many people are in favor of legalizing marijuana? And how many against? You know, I wish we could break out the age demographic here. That would show you how that kind of predictably there. But I don't know. Nolan, you and I have talked about the drug war a million times on Flashpoint before, because I think about, in fact, it was just a couple weeks ago, Detroit police showed us this enormous heroin bust that they had. They they walk in, they bring all the cameras in to see all of the heroin that they had taken, all the money that they had taken. My hunch is that a bust that size didn't change the price of heroin that week 1 cent.
No, and
So what are we spending our money on?
well, that's always the question. And you know that we lost this drug war 30 years ago, particularly the war on marijuana.
Have
we're
we
not
ever declared
keeping
war on anything social and won?
Never. And we, you know, we are not keeping. Everybody says, well, if you legalize marijuana, then kids will be able to get marijuana. I guarantee you, it's easier for a high school kid to get marijuana than it is to get a bottle of bourbon.
They will tell you that.
Because that is a controlled, regulated, or a substance that whose delivery and distribution is controlled and governed by the state and through the legal markets. If you took marijuana out of the criminal element and sold it at CVS, you wouldn't have people on the playgrounds pushing marijuana.
But can you convince me that if it was legalized, that you wouldn't have some new users who you wouldn't have if it remained illegal?
Who can't get it now? Who wants it?
Well,
You remove it.
yeah, I can't imagine there's, in fact, any drug, I can't imagine there's anybody going, gosh, I want to take drugs, I just don't know how to get any.
Now, removing the stigma may increase drug use somewhat. And you probably find studies that would confirm that. But my feeling is, so what? We have had a horrible track record of trying to keep people from their vices.
We can't keep drugs out of prison.
Yeah, exactly right. And we have had a horrible track. We spend something on the order of $85 billion a year on the drug war. We empower the Mexican drug cartels. We have destroyed our central cities with this, and yet we keep plugging away because we think it's the righteous thing to do. And I think if you look at what's happening in other states and the national mood, at least, there does seem to be a sentiment that maybe it's time to start and reevaluate a better approach to this.
Do the crosstabs show a gender difference?
You know, I didn't look at that.
It shows an age difference, not
Yes,
necessarily
it's
a
age, yeah,
gender.
it's age.
a
But
gender
I
issue.
didn't look at a gender difference. That would be interesting.
What about political identification, like between Democrats and Republicans?
I believe
check
I did
that.
look at that. Democrats were slightly, but it wasn't enormous. Yeah, yeah. Yes.
I just think and I don't even want to get into the age thing, but I think that, and I'm doing this because I can't say yes or no, but
Yeah.
you know, my morally, you know, I've been raised to say if it's wrong, you don't give it the blessing, but logically, it makes sense for the reasons that you mentioned, and I'd kind of like to see us get sales tax on
Sure.
you know, I just think that kids can get cigarettes whenever they want it. They
Yeah.
can get alcohol whenever they want it. And you're right. If you think that there's anybody out there, any kid who doesn't know how to get marijuana or any other drugs, you get your head buried in the sand because they all know where to get this stuff and how to get it. And it's I just think I have to agree with what you say. We're just we're flogging a dead horse.
Look, we used to consider gambling a vice that merited law enforcement involvement, and now the state is in the gambling business. And look at the result of that. We've got 50 Indian casinos in this state, three or four commercial casinos were making money. The state's reaping money off it. When the state found out it could make money off gambling, gambling became a lot less offensive.
In fact, the funny thing is for, you know, when Detroit accepted casinos, at that moment, it seemed like extra money. Can you imagine taking casino money away now from the city of Detroit?
No, I can't.
Yes. We had another comment right back there. Yeah, huh?
Yeah, one more before we run out of time.
We'll get right back over there in a second. Yeah, go ahead.
Did you do any of the congressional district primaries, like 14?
We didn't because it was a
11?
it was a statewide poll, so we
Okay.
really couldn't break them down to
Yeah.
districts. Yes.
John Broad from Crime Stoppers.
Yes, John.
You're right in that anybody who wants to get drugs can get drugs. The other part of it is that we're making our young people into criminals. And so they're tagged with a criminal offense.
Right.
Makes it more difficult to get jobs. We find that they therefore continue to participate in criminal activities. In every way, it's the wrong move. It's prohibition, and that didn't work, and this hasn't worked. Anybody that wants drugs can get it.
And it's the hypocrisy of our culture, too, and the contradiction of our culture in that you turn on the television show and all the hip, hot shows, you know, they're making marijuana jokes and you know, treating marijuana usage as it's no big deal. And then, you know, we go out here and arrest these people and throw them in jail. If you got a marijuana card because your knee hurts, you can smoke it legally. If you're just somebody who wants to use a drug recreationally, you're a criminal. So there's
How
too many
hard was it to get a
contradictions.
card?
I didn't get a card, but
Just kidding. Just kidding.
I don't think it's too hard. But it's that sort of no, we've got two classes of marijuana users, and we kid ourselves if we think the system is not being abused.
Well, the other concern that is raised a lot, though, is that this is, I guess the phrase would be not your father's marijuana, that marijuana has become more potent over the years than what many people may remember.
And bathtub gin killed people.
Right.
When we had a prohibition on alcohol and people were making it in stills and using the lead in the solder and what have you, it made people blind. It killed people. So if you legalized it and let Pfizer grow it and distribute it, you can control the content. And I think if you legalize it, that and maybe one other class of drugs, you can stop all of this meth and all of these other really, the spiked heroin, all these really dangerous drugs that, you don't know what you're getting.
Anybody else with a comment about anything? Sure.
You guys seem to know a lot of things. I was just curious.
Boy, if we got you, Buffalo. Telling you.
We know a little about a lot of things.
I was just
but
curious.
This is the extent of it.
Right. Yeah, this is it. As you guys have been doing this study, when you're talking about the legalization of marijuana, was there any sort of numbers on how that drops incarceration rates? Because as we all know, statewide, nationwide, incarceration rates are appalling. There's too many people in jail for minor offenses.
That's one of the things that we haven't been able to tell yet about Colorado that I think a lot of people are anxious to see. You need more passage of time, but it's going to be fascinating to watch how that changes their penal picture there. Absolutely right. Yeah, I think that'll be fascinating.
And back to the roads discussion, you look at how we've prioritized spending in this state. We've increased spending on prisons. It's a $2 billion a year hit to our general fund. We've increased welfare spending, and it takes away money from other priorities like education and roads. Imagine if you could take $500, $600, $700 million out of that prison budget. Imagine what that would look like in terms of a better education system, a better infrastructure.
So in Colorado, are the employers more lenient when it comes to prospective employees that are smoking marijuana?
Yeah, what happens to the drug testing business? I mean, that's a really good question.
Which, by the way, every American, whether they use drugs or don't use drugs, should be appalled at that assault on the Fourth Amendment, that your employer can drag you out and say, pee in a cup, and I don't care if you used the marijuana Saturday night on your own time or smoked it this morning before you went to work, you're out of here. Nobody tests you to see if you got drunk Saturday night. But they think it's their business that you got high Saturday night.
If you're an employer, is it your business if your employee robbed a bank on Saturday?
Not the same thing.
Not on my
at all.
time you didn't.
Not the same thing, Devin. If you come to work high, that's one thing. If you got high on Saturday and you're not an airline
You're still
pilot or
breaking
a
the
truck
law
driver,
away from work, though, is what.
but
No, we're not in Colorado.
Again, you have Fourth Amendment rights. Your employer doesn't have the right to go into your house and rifle through your drawers to see if you've broken the law in some way. Forcing you to do a drug test as a condition of employment ought to appall all of us.
Yes, sir. John, yeah.
One last thing is that we're staring at marijuana. There's an epidemic of heroin overdose.
Yes, yes.
He was telling me that in County, they've got records from the medical examiner of a drug overdose every one a day.
Yes.
And the Macomb County, Monroe is declared an epidemic. You can get a heroin fix for $5 to $10.
Right.
And it's become a substitute for some prescription drugs, so that you can't have the availability for those, and so then you end up using heroin and you overdose and die.
I think it speaks to my frustration with the drug war has been that for forever we seem to have fought this war as a problem of supply. It is a problem of demand. We have a world in which a lot of people for whom reality is either too much or not enough. And I don't think that drying up a supply of one drug or another changes what is at its heart a mental health issue. So, I don't know, maybe.
What we need to do also, though, is somehow better police doctors that are having these prescriptions that they're giving to people that become addictive.
Exactly.
And so
Yeah.
therefore they can't get off of it and end up switching to heroin when they can't get the legal drug.
Yep, that's ends up it's become the new a pain medication has become the new, prescribed pain medication has become the new gateway drug.
We got time for one last comment before both he and I have to go tape TV show.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I think, thank you. There are some benefits that we understand could come from legalization of marijuana, but studies have shown for many years that it is an entry-level drug.
Right.
These folks start there, and the bell-shaped curve, of course, there's going to be a certain percentage of these folks who graduate to crack, who graduate to heroin, and that's a slippery slope.
But not every user and not even a majority of users graduate on. We spend an awful lot of money in this country to keep drugs away from what amounts to recreational users. The number of hardcore addicts who are going to destroy their lives with drugs is a relatively small percentage of the population compared to what we spend trying to keep them away from drugs. The vast majority of drug users in this country are still recreational drugs who use it the same way you might use alcohol.
But I think maybe we ought to talk to the chamber, but you've clearly shown us this might not be a worthy session next year, and we could have experts who know a lot more about it than we do.
Thank you all
Y'all,
for
thank
coming.
you very much for coming. Appreciate you being here.